deposed Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro has pleaded not guilty to U.S. federal drug trafficking charges, insisting he is the constitutional president of his country and protesting his capture in a dramatic early morning raid on his home in Caracas. Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, were flown under heavy security to Manhattan federal court, where both appeared in shackles and jail-issued clothing, listening to proceedings through Spanish translation headsets. Now, the 25-page indictment accuses Maduro and Flores of running a cartel that shipped tons of cocaine into the U.S. Maduro's lawyer said that he plans to challenge the legality of the military abduction, claiming Maduro is entitled to diplomatic immunity as the head of a sovereign state. While outside the courthouse, protesters both supporting and denouncing the U.S. operation clashed as Maduro insisted that he was kidnapped as the president and is a prisoner of war. Well, the United States has defended the arrest and transfer of Nicolas Maduro to face trial in New York, describing the operation as a lawful law enforcement action and not an act of war against Venezuela. Speaking at the United Nations, the U.S. Ambassador Mike Waltz and Maduro and his wife Celia Flores were arrested on long-standing U.S. indictment charges linked to narco-terrorism, drug trafficking, and weapons smuggling.
Colleagues, Maduro is not just an indicted drug trafficker. He was an illegitimate so-called president. He was not a head of state. For years, Maduro and his cronies have manipulated Venezuela's electoral system to maintain their illegitimate grip on power. In fact, just 2 years ago in 2024, a UN panel of experts report found that the election in that year was absolutely and completely a farce and fell well short of the most basic transparency and integrity measures essential to upholding credible elections. If the UN and the United Nations in this body confers legitimacy on an illegitimate narco-terrorist and the same treatment in this charter of a democratically elected president or head of state, what kind of organization is this?
Meanwhile, international criticism of the U.S. abduction is growing, with the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres calling it a dangerous precedent. The UN Security Council is meeting to discuss the U.S. military action, and reaction internationally has predictably been divided along the lines of Maduro's allies and enemies. Russia and left-wing leaders in Latin America have condemned the U.S. action, and China has called for Mr. Maduro's immediate release, saying the U.S. had violated international law. But right-wing presidents in the region, including in Argentina, supported the American action, and has so Israel and other staunch U.S. partners. Well, in Europe, many welcomed the ousting of Maduro, but they also raised concerns about how it was done. Pope Leo also worked for 2 decades in South America. He said Venezuela's sovereignty should be guaranteed.
In situations as confused as complex as the one we now face, it is important to stick to principles. Respect for the UN Charter and all other applicable legal frameworks to safeguard peace and security. Respect for the principles of sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity of states. The prohibition of the threat or use of force. The power of the law must prevail. International law contains tools to address issues such as illicit traffic in narcotics, disputes about resources, and human rights concerns. This is the route we need.
Well, to discuss these latest developments surrounding the ongoing trial of captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, we're joined now by Arise special correspondent James Blue. It's great to have you here on Newsday. Thank you for joining me again, James.
Glad to be here.
So Maduro has pleaded not guilty, claiming that he was kidnapped from his home and once again what will be the legal hurdles for the U.S. Department of Justice in prosecuting a foreign leader for narco-terrorism when the international community, well, it remains divided in the legality of the entire operation?
Well, I think, there's sort of two things happening, things inside the courtroom and things outside the courtroom. So Maduro and his wife, Ms. Flores, had their first sort of initial visit in the U.S. Judicial system. And it's a 92-year-old judge. He was appointed by President Bill Clinton. He's apparently a real stickler and quite stubborn. And some people might think because of his age, he might be fit. I am told by people who've worked with him and who've prosecuted cases under him is that he is quite fit, quite efficient, and quite capable in handling this trial. He set March 17th as the next court date, and so that is sort of going to be time for President Maduro and his wife to really continue to prepare their cases. The indictment was 25 pages long. It's very long. There are a number of sort of legal issues, and there's absolutely no way that there would be a trial between now and the end of the year. This will certainly go on in sort of pretrial efforts for about a year. And so that's what's happening inside the courtroom. Outside the courtroom, there are all of these questions about the legality. Is he here? Under what law? Is this a violation of the UN Charter? And those are very important arguments. But quite honestly, none of those items impact what's happening inside the courtroom. The U.S. judicial system is completely separate from the UN Charter and the UN treaties that the U.S. has signed. And so those will sort of be parallel questions that are being asked. And at the end of the day, those questions are likely to have zero sort of impact into what is actually happening in the courtroom, because the court is not in a position and will not sort of answer the question of the legality of his getting there, the legality of their being presented in court. That is not an issue for this court. This court is only going to sort of adjudicate the guilt or innocence, and the trial is about the guilt or innocence specific to the crimes committed by alleged crimes committed by President Maduro and his wife. And so all of the chatter about the upset and the indignity and sort of head of state, it has no bearing on the actual courtroom action. And if you look at this picture here, this is a very important picture. You see the DEA agents escorting President Maduro. And so what the Trump administration has tried to do is to say this was a DEA, a regular drug enforcement agency arrest that was assisted by the U.S. military. And this picture really says it all. Every one of those persons there, in addition to President Maduro and his wife, are DEA agents. You can see the guy getting close-up pictures on his phone, and that's very important. It's not a military activity in the words of the Trump administration.
Well, thank you for clearing that up. It actually does make a lot of sense that, regardless of the outside chatter, that it won't really affect much that is going on within the courtroom. Now, I want to talk about the successor. Despite her initial renunciation or denunciation of the U.S. kidnapping, the acting president, Rodriguez, she's now expressed a willingness to cooperate with Washington and the Trump administration. In your view, do you see this as a genuine shift in policy, or more of a survival tactic to prevent further military strikes in Venezuela?
I think the acting president, the interim president, I'm not exactly sure of the current title. I think what you have is the president and his team want to get the oil pumping out of Venezuela. And they really decided that stability, a hand that is sort of familiar with the governing structures, is more important than bringing in someone who is sort of a democracy advocate and someone who actually won the free and fair election. And so the current acting president is a very, very particular character. She is from a family, a very wealthy family of industrialists. She was educated abroad, went to university in France. And what she has done as the steward of the economy in Venezuela, despite the sanctions, despite all of the sort of crushing things that have happened, she has sort of turned the Venezuelan economy into a capitalist economy. It had been much more of a socialist economy, much more price controls, price supports. And so despite all of the economic suffering that they've had, they have now sort of transitioned to the sort of capitalist economy. And the thought by the Trump administration is that she can keep things going. She can sort of help relaunch the Venezuelan oil industry. And they were very concerned that Maria Machado and the opposition were out of touch, that they did not really kind of have their hands on the pulse of the country. There were two things that happened that I think really kind of showed the Trump administration that Machado might not be the right one. When the presidential envoy at the very beginning of the Trump term went to Caracas to try to free some of the U.S. Citizens who'd been held hostage and held in prisons, the Machado opposition sort of basically forbade them to negotiate with the Maduro government. In addition, despite pleas and requests, Machado never met directly with the president's envoy. Instead, they had a phone conversation. I think the intelligence that the Trump administration has gotten from the opposition has been dated, has been inaccurate, and has not in any way given them confidence that they can actually lead. I think finally they decided, since the goal is oil extraction, that they did not have to install or did not have to support the person who has won the most votes in the last election. And I think, there was a lot of ways in which Maria Machado and her movement, the opposition movement, just haven't sort of kept up with the country. And I think that dissonance, that tension, those mistakes, their inaccuracies, all of those things compounded, sort of convincing the Trump administration that these were not the people to sort of move things forward in a stable and safe way. And that is why they've chosen President Maduro as vice president.
Right. Well, we are bound to see things evolve as time progresses. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon, James Blue, our Arise special correspondent in the U.S.